Thank you very much. You must be tired. This is the first day. So this is very important lecture on the community acquired pneumonia. And I will be discussing about overview, epidemiology, etiology, diagnosis, severity assessment, the treatment outline, and the outcome. So as you know, the community acquired pneumonia refers to an acute infection of the pulmonary parenchyma, which has been acquired outside of the healthcare settings. Those who they are acquired in the hospital are called nosocomial pneumonia, and the VAP and nosocomial pneumonia is a separate topic. So I will be only focusing on the community acquired pneumonia. So this disease again is known for a long time, and William Osler described as a captain of the men's jet. So obviously this disease, it still holds good because community acquired pneumonia is one of the most common causes hospital admission. This is one of the most common cause of infection-related mortality, and about 21% of the patient of the CAP require ICU admission, and about 26% require mechanical ventilation. The mortality of this condition is still extremely high. It's about 25 to 50%. The one of the main reasons may be that this actually affects older individuals who have a lot of comorbidity with them. So maybe because of that, the mortality is still high. So coming to the causes, it can be the typical causes, atypical causes, and viruses. The typical causes are because these can be identified in the culture. So they are called typical organisms. The most common amongst them is Streptococcus pneumoniae. Haemophilus influenzae, Moraxella catarrhalis, they are also commonly seen, especially those patients with a COPD exacerbation. Staph aureus, both the MSSA and MRSA strain can be seen, although MRSA is more common in the healthcare associated infection, but community acquired MRSA is an entirety which can cause severe necrotizing pneumonia. Other than that, group A Streptococci is also seen sometimes. Aerobic gram-negative bacteria, they are seen more commonly with the healthcare associated infections, and those patients who have, they are immunocompromised, the gram-negative infections are more common. And then we have microaerophilic bacteria and anaerobe, they are primarily common in those patients who have an aspiration. Coming to the atypical infections, atypical is normally, they are not cultured, so that's why they are called atypical. The most common amongst them is the Legionella. Legionella pneumonia is very common and a very severe disease. Mycoplasma pneumonia is also seen. Chlamydia, pneumonia, and Sertoli and Coxiella, they are rare entirety. So amongst other viruses are nowadays a very important cause of the pneumonia. More and more viruses are being isolated in the patients of community acquired pneumonia. The rhinovirus is most common, followed by the influenza A and B. Parainfluenza and adenoviruses, they are seen mainly in the children. Respiratory syncytial virus can be seen in children and the elderly. And those other viruses are not that common. It's very important not to forget Mycobacterium tuberculosis, especially in Indian tuberculosis in the Indian patient, because 5% of the patient in our flora can be caused by the tuberculosis. So TB should always be in the differential diagnosis of CAP in India at least. Okay, so this is a recent data that came 2015 to ascertain the cause of the community acquired pneumonia. This is a very big study conducted in the United States. What they have found, the most common cause was human rhinovirus, followed by the influenza A and B. And the Streptococcus pneumoniae was third. So, but it's also very important to understand that almost in 62% of the patient, they could not identify any cause. So in majority of the patient, you will not be able to identify any organism in community acquired pneumonia. And the viral infection are more common than the bacterial infection. So this study has shown a lot that incidence of pneumococcus is decreasing due to widespread immunization. The pneumococcus incidence has come down significantly, especially in the Western population. And more number of the respiratory viruses are being isolated for the community acquired pneumonia. The reason may be the better molecular diagnostic techniques are now available, which we can identify viruses through the PCR. Okay, coming to the risk factors, as we discussed already, the age is the most common risk factors, and those patients who have more comorbidities, I will tell you about the comorbidities later on, they have higher chance of the community acquired pneumonia. It's also very common in those patients who have impaired airway reflex, leading to the aspiration and pneumonia. Smoking and alcoholics, alcoholics are very prone to pneumonia, and other lifestyle related issue like those patients who are in the low income group, prisoners, the pneumonia is more common in them. So the age increases the incidence of the pneumonia, as you can see here, the progressive increase in the incidence of pneumonia with the increase in the age as risk factors. So those patients who has a COPD, they have the highest chances of developing the pneumonia out of all other factors, followed by the congestive heart failure, followed by a stroke, followed by diabetes, a smoker, and so on. So coming to the pathogenesis is usually it's caused by the aspiration, because as you know that this is mainly a disease of the elderly. So as the patient, the age grows, the airway reflexes comes down, and there is a possibility of the aspiration. So there can be a pathogen source because of the poor dental sinusitis, oropharyngeal, gastric invasive devices, and the biofilm formation. This is for the ventilator-associated pneumonia. And if any reason causes decrease in the lung defenses, presence of aspiration with a decrease in the lung defense can cause pneumonia. And if the organism is also virulent, then there is a possibility of pneumonia development. And this pneumonia can also be caused because of the droplet infection, which we see normally with viruses. Sometimes pneumonia can be because of the hematogenous spread. The patient has a primary bacteremia, then there is a seeding inside the lung, and that can cause pneumonia. So when the infection happens, then the bacteria goes inside the alveolar lining here, as you can see, and their uncontrolled multiplication occurs. The local production of cytokine starts taking place. This migrate, and the leukocytes starts migrating at the site, and this causes increase in consolidation. So this is a pathogenesis of pneumonia. Right? Coming to the clinical features can be both pulmonary and extrapulmonary. In pulmonary, you have cough, which can be both productive or non-productive, dyspnea, pleuritic chest pain, and the raised crackle and rhonchi, tachypnea, increased work of breathing. These are the main pulmonary manifestation. In the systemic manifestation, patient can present with a fever or hypothermia. Hypothermia is more common in extreme of age. Sometimes patient can present a simple weakness and malaise, especially in the elderly patient. Patient presents with many atypical symptoms like altered mental status, hypotension, and other signs of organ dysfunction can be there. So diagnosis is made on the basis of typical clinical features and demonstration of the infiltrate on chest imaging. The X-ray features are suggestive pneumonia, can be consolidation here, or the interstitial infiltrate, which is mainly seen in the viruses and atypical infection, and sometimes because very severe pneumonia like a staph and Klebsiella, you can have a cavitatory lesion. Normally the CT scan is not required for all the patients, but the indication the CT scan will be if there is a severe or complex pneumonia. Patient is immunocompromised or should always undergo a CT scan. Those patients who has received the treatment of pneumonia but not improving, and then those patients who are not, pneumonia is not resolving, and if some patient where there is a high clinical suspicion but the normal chest X-ray is there, then which is commonly, which type of patients? Neutropenic. So neutropenic sepsis, you will see the chest X-ray is normal, but you will get a CT scan, they can see the infiltrate. So this is one group of the patient where this type of the picture can be there. Or sometimes if you have a doubt in the diagnosis, the patient is not improving, so then also CT scan should be done. Lung ultrasound is again a very good imaging modality for the diagnosis of pneumonia. It's a very good sensitivity, about 60 to 90%, but specificity is also very good. So if it's 90% more, the advantage is it's radiation free and it can be done on the bedside and you can quickly make the diagnosis. And in the pregnant ladies, you can see, you can do it, and there is no exposure. Then dynamic evaluation is here. So somebody has seen, the same person is seeing the next day, so he can evaluate the progressive increase or decrease in the pneumonia. The appearance wise, there will be serrated margin, hepatization happens, which can be easily seen. Then air bronchogram, which is a dynamic air bronchogram that we have shown today in the video. This is a classical of pneumonia. And pylorary shred sign. All these things can be seen, and if these things are there and you have a clinical sign and symptom, then this patient is having pneumonia, right? So this is a consolidation. As you can see, the small air bronchial with the hepatization of the lung. It looks more like a liver, right? Coming to the differential diagnosis, the differential diagnoses are many. If there is an abnormal chest radiograph, these are the differential diagnosis: pneumonitis, congestive heart failure, infarction, acute exacerbation of pulmonary fibrosis, and many other conditions. With a normal chest X-ray, it can be a bronchitis, pneumonia, pertussis, and exacerbation of the chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases. So what are the other investigations that we have to do? We have already seen the radiology. The routine investigations has to be done. It can be a hematological, CBC differential, those all routine investigation. But all those patients who has been hospitalized, they should have a sputum as well as nasal swab, or if you suspect H1N1 or other viral infection. The blood cultures should be taken for all hospitalized patients. Patient is intubated, you need to do an ET aspirate, and bronchoscopy is not routinely required for all the patients. It should only be reserved for the non-resolving cases. And in some cases where there is a diagnostic dilemma, we can go ahead with the lung biopsy. So the blood culture, normally the yield in pneumonia is very low. As you can see, the yield between is 5 to 33% is seen depending on the different studies. So the true positive culture is seen only in 0 to 14% patient, and the commonest organism is isolated, which is pneumococcus. So if it is a pneumococcus, normally you can see the blood culture positive. But for other organisms, usually the culture is not positive most of the time. And it doesn't change the antibiotic decision most of the time. So although it has to be done, but it usually doesn't change the outcome of the patient. IDSA guideline recommends that all patient who has had been admitted in the intensive care unit, or there is a cavulatory infiltrate, or patient has a leukopenia, or alcoholic, or patient with other conditions, chronic disease like CLD, so these patients should have a blood culture. The Indian guideline says that obtain blood culture in all hospitalized patients, but it's not routine for the OPD patient. So it's only if the patient has been hospitalized and only you should take the blood cultures. The newer tests are also there, like urinary antigen. You can use the Streptococcus and group 1 Legionella antigen can be tested. It has a good sensitivity and a specificity, and it can be done within 15 minutes. And usually the antibiotic has no effect on that as culture, because even one dose of antibiotic can change the culture's yield. Okay, so the serological outcome is mainly done for the chlamydia and mycoplasma, and other molecular diagnostic methods are there. So they are mainly for the viral infections. So what Indian guideline in 2013 recommends that patient Legionella urinary testing is desirable in patient with a severe community acquired pneumonia. Pneumococcal antigen detection is not required routinely in the management of the CAP. And atypical investigation like mycoplasma, chlamydia, and viruses are routinely not required. And pneumococcal PCR is not recommended as a routine diagnostic test in the patients of community acquired pneumonia. Okay, so what are the role of the biomarkers? There are many biomarkers which have been tested. Most of them are mainly focus has been on the procalcitonin and the C-reactive protein. Then other biomarkers has been tested. So I will be focusing a little bit on the procalcitonin. As you can see, the procalcitonin is mainly tested for respiratory infection, and the level varies depending on the severity of the infection. So what they have seen, that those patients whose level increases from 1.5 to 10 nanogram per ml, the risk of bacterial and sepsis and septic shock increases. So usually if level is between 0.5 and above, that usually fairly denotes that patient may be having a typical bacterial infection. If the level is between 0.05 to 0.50, there is a possibility of the atypical infection, and if the level is less than 0.5, there is a possibility of the viral infection. But this is not hard and fast rule, and most of the time it is not recommended to make the diagnosis of community acquired pneumonia on the basis of procalcitonin level. So procalcitonin level may help in differentiating the CAP from other non-infectious causes like congestive heart failure, and it can also help you in de-escalating the antibiotic. And as we have already discussed, that those patients, the level of the procalcitonin is high, the possible mortality is high. So it is kind of tells you that patient is sick. But the recent studies, they do not support the use of the procalcitonin. And what they have seen, this was a PROACT trial of 2017. There is no difference in antibiotic-free days or survival in the procalcitonin group and the placebo group. And in fact, in one of the study, what they have seen, there is an increase in the C. difficile infection in those patients whose antibiotic was tapered according to the procalcitonin level. So the recent trials, as you know, the PRORATA trials suggested, but the recent trials do not support routine use of procalcitonin, guided management of antibiotics. So what Indian guidelines suggest? Indian guidelines suggest that procalcitonin and CRP measurements are not to be performed routinely as a routine investigation for the diagnosis of community acquired pneumonia. Coming to the severity assessment, I'm sorry if the slide is not that visible, but I will be describing this IDSA and the curve 65. The many severity assessment system are being used, but most of them are basically the best amongst them is IDSA 2007 criteria and curve 65. The others are slightly complicated too, that normally is not required in most of the patients. So the curve 65 is again that basically measures 5 parameters. One is C for confusion, urea level of more than 20 milligram, respiratory for more than 30, blood pressure less than 90 or less than 60, and age more than 65 years. So if all of them gets 1 point, okay, if the level is 0, that Kurb's score is 0, these patients can be managed on the outpatient basis. And 0 to 1. If more than 1 is scored, these patients ideally should be hospitalized. So the Kurb's scoring is mainly to identify which patient should be admitted in the hospital and which patient should receive OPD-based treatment. It's not for ICU admission. The another criteria is IDSA 2007 criteria, which has two major criteria and several minor criteria. So presence of one major or presence of 3 minor criteria, I will tell you that this patient has a severe community acquired pneumonia, and these patients should be admitted in intensive care unit, not in ward. Those patients who has a severe community acquired pneumonia, then they should be admitted under intensive care unit. So curve 65 and PSI, or pneumonia severity index, they have a good prediction for 30 days mortality, but they have been less sensitive in identifying ICU admission. IDSA and ATS criteria and the SMART curve, which is almost same as of IDSA criteria, they show that if you are using this protocol, there is improvement in mortality, reduce and delay in ICU admission, and better ICU utilization with this criteria. People are also using the sepsis 3 criteria. Those patients who are in sepsis or septic shock, they can also be admitted in intensive care unit. Well, coming to the antimicrobial therapy. So as we know that administration of the antimicrobial therapy for the community acquired pneumonia within 42 hours or 8 hours of hospital stay is associated with 5 to 43% reduction in the mortality. This is in general for the community acquired pneumonia. This we are not talking about sepsis here. But you know that the famous Dr. Kumar's study, where every hour delay in the antibiotic in septic shock is associated with increase in mortality by 8%. So all these patients, once you have made the diagnosis of the CAP, these patients should receive the antibiotic ideally within 1 hour. Within 1 hour. Okay. So the surviving sepsis guideline recommends administering antibiotic within first hour of recognition of sepsis and septic shock. So any patient, because the CAP is the most common cause of sepsis in hospitalized patient, so these patients should also receive antibiotic within 1 hour. Coming to the treatment, the outpatient treatment, I'm not going to that. Those patients who have not received any antibiotic, a simple macrolide is enough for those patients. But those patients who has comorbidities, antibiotic within 90 days, so these patients should receive a respiratory fluoroquinolones or beta-lactam plus macrolide. So the management of the inpatient, the non-ICU patient is same as of the outpatient. But those patients who are sick enough to receive the ICU admission, they should receive a beta-lactam therapy plus fluoroquinolones or macrolide, any one of them. Those patients who are penicillin allergic, they should receive aztreonam plus fluoroquinolones. Okay? If you have a suspicion of the pseudomonas, then ideally these patients should have an anti-pseudomonal, anti-pneumococcal beta-lactam, which is cefepime, ceftazidime, cefeprazone, piperacillin tazobactam, cefeprazone sulbactam, imipenem or meropenem, any one of them, plus either a ciprofloxacin or a levofloxacin, okay, or a aminoglycoside plus a macrolide. So this is a combination therapy that has to be utilized if you are suspecting a pseudomonas, right? If the community acquired MRSA is a possibility, then either you should add a vancomycin or teicoplanin or linezolid. Okay. If the pest pathogen is a possibility, the pest one is pseudomonas, we have already discussed. Another is Enterobacteriaceae, and third one is MRSA. So these are the these are the risk factors of pest pathogen. Okay. So those patients who has hospitalized for more than 2 days in last 90 days. Those patients on hemodialysis, gastric acid suppression therapy, or they are immunosuppressed patient who has received home wound care, a chronic, they are suffering from chronic diseases. Is there any history of MRSA colonization or a Pseudomonas colonization? Or any patient who has received antibiotic therapy in last 3 to 6 months, there is a possibility of enterobacterial infection with the gram-negative mainly, and Pseudomonas and MRSA, right? So in these patients, ideally the same treatment should continue. Okay, this is the same therapy for the pest also. Okay, so effect of quinolone exposure prior to the diagnosis of tuberculosis. So what is recommended in India, that we know that tuberculosis is very rampant and a lot of drug resistant infections are there, and the quinolones are used as a second line therapy for the for ATT. So what is recommended, that the quinolone therapy can cause mask the active tuberculosis, and it can delay the diagnosis of the tuberculosis. And it's also been seen that it increases the risk of death during the ATT treatment. It causes worse prognosis on those patients who has received fluoroquinolones. And we are talking about the pneumonia patient who later found to have tuberculosis. And the most important amongst all is that the risk of imparting the drug-resistant tuberculosis is there with the use of the fluoroquinolones. So what Indian guidelines differ from the IDSA guideline, that you should use fluoroquinolone only if macrolide beta-lactam cannot be used. And before starting the fluoroquinolones, you have to exclude the tuberculosis, right? So coming to the duration of therapy, the duration of therapy is usually once patient starts taking orally and it's better, there is no hard and fast rule. You can shift the patient to the oral therapy, and duration is normally 5 to 7 days for most of the patients. For the most of the patient, you can use a 5 to 7 days, you can straight away stop. But if your patient has an MRSA infection or the Legionella infection or the severe sepsis with the pneumococcus, the duration can be increased. Especially for the MRSA, the patient should at least receive the antibiotic for 14 days, 2 weeks minimum. Okay, so these are the newer antibiotics that they are being tested in the phase 3 trials: lefamulin, omadacycline, levofloxacin, and I'm not able to read it. So the basically most of these studies actually they are actually not yet available in the market. Some of them I have undergone a phase 3 trial. But the good thing about them is most of them are active against drug-resistant Streptococcus pneumoniae. They are effective against MRSA, and they are effective against most of the atypical pathogens. So these drugs will be available in next 1 or 2 years, and they can be utilized. Okay, coming to the antiviral therapy, there are a lot of antiviral nowadays approved for the management of them, but only few indications for starting the antiviral therapy is there. So for the influenza pneumonia, those patients who has been hospitalized with influenza, regardless of the severity of the illness, they should receive antiviral therapy. Those patients who have been treated with the outpatient and they developed a severe or progressive disease, they should be treated. Those patients who are high risk of complication like immunocompromised and with the chronic illness should be treated. Any person with more than 65 years of age and less than 2 years of age should be treated, and all pregnant women and those within 2 weeks of the postpartum, they should be treated with if you suspect influenza pneumonia in these patients. Rest of the patient you no need to give therapy. But it's very important, any patient who has been hospitalized with influenza, irrespective of the severity of the illness, should receive influenza treatment. So this is the treatment. Oseltamivir is given for both influenza A and B, 75 mg BD for 5 days. But if the patient is sick, you can give 150 mg BD also, and the duration of therapy can be increased depending on the patient's severity. So zanamivir is used, especially IV formulation of the zanamivir is being tested for the oseltamivir resistant cases. And the baloxavir is the most recent one. It's basically an endonuclease inhibitor, which recently has been tested. There's a new trial which has come. They have shown the efficacy of the baloxavir is better than oseltamivir for the treatment, right? Coming to the role of the steroid. So the steroid is normally not indicated for all patients of community acquired pneumonia. It should only be given for the severe community acquired pneumonia. and those patients who has a severe CAP with very high inflammation. That means the CRP level is high, more than 15 milligram per deciliter, or the patient is in septic shock, or the patient is in ARDS. Then in this group of the patient, there has been decrease in the mortality reduction. But before starting this, you have to rule out the contraindications. So this was a recent meta-analysis which has shown that patient of the severe community acquired pneumonia, the mortality is better and the treatment failure is less with the use of steroid. Okay. It's also very important that steroid should not be used for the treatment of influenza pneumonia, because the use of the steroid in H1N1 pneumonia is associated with increase in the mortality, increase in incidence of the VAP, longer duration of mechanical ventilation, or increased ICU length of the stay. For some reason, if you have started the treatment for initial empirical, you have started, then if H1N1 comes positive, please stop this. Okay. It has been tested that it increases the mortality in both case control as well as cohort studies, right? Now, what should be done with a patient who is, despite of adequate treatment, they are not improving? So, this condition is called non-resolving pneumonia. So, most of the time, this is host factor. Because if the patient is immunocompromised, they are sick to begin with, they usually take time. And many of the patients actually will not improve. Even though you have the correct diagnosis of the community acquired pneumonia, they will not improve. So there are genetic factors, age, and their immune status, all that plays an important part here, right? So if you are getting good therapy but patient is not improving, there is a possibility of the resistant infection or there will be unusual organism. The superinfection, which is very common, patient presented with H1N1 pneumonia developed Acinetobacter after 2 or 3 days of hospitalization. So patient has developed a secondary infection, which is quite common. Then there can be complication of the treatment, like complication of the disease. So it can be a parapneumonic effusion or empyema, lung abscess, metastatic abscess, ARDS, and organizing pneumonia. And again, if despite of everything, patient is not improving, then we have to revisit our diagnosis, that if our diagnosis is correct or not. So my conclusion is that community acquired pneumonia is a leading cause of death, and early recognition of the CAP is of paramount importance. The clinical risk assessment scoring system helps in making the decision of ICU and hospital admission. Blood cultures or cultures from respiratory symptoms should be obtained prior to antibiotics ideally. Early antimicrobial therapy has shown to reduce mortality. Respiratory failure and septic shock requiring ICU, should be managed in the ICU. And effective teamwork between emergency medicine and critical care team is imperative. Thank you.